Okay, everybody, I think we'll get started. Hello and welcome to the 7th seminar of the International Year of the Salmon, the IYS seminar series. My name is Aidan Schubert and I'm the IYS coordinator for the North Pacific region with the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission. We're very excited to have you here. I'd like to start by acknowledging that the IYS Secretariat is based on the ancestral, unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And we thank them for their stewardship of these lands and waters that have sustained salmon since time immemorial. So today's seminar represents the culmination of the previous 6 seminars in the series that have taken place over the last 5 months, where we have had the privilege of hearing from over 20 different experts from 6 countries on the rationale behind the IYS high seas expeditions, the results from the 2019 and 2020 expeditions, technologies such as autonomous vehicles and salmon and genomics that have been utilized and are being utilized in the 2022 expedition, the power and utility of data mobilization, and how high seas research can be used to inform salmon management actions through the likely suspects framework. Today, we'll be looking beyond the 2022 expedition at how the outcomes of the 3 IYS high seas expeditions can be used to inform future international research efforts. And we will hear about several large-scale projects that are in development and are looking to tackle some of the greatest challenges facing Pacific salmon and the North Pacific more broadly. This seminar will be recorded and made available on the IYS website in the coming week. We are very much looking forward to having your input on this seminar, so please ask questions using the Q&A function or by raising your hand. And with that, I will hand it over to the IYS Director, Mark Saunders, who will be leading today's seminar.
Great, thank you very much, Aidan. Like Aidan said, we're really excited to have everybody here today, and I'll introduce the panel in a few minutes that are going to speak to and work through this the future of where we're going beyond this. So by way of an outline, I'll give a presentation on the joint UN Decade project that we call BECI, B-E-C-I, Basin Events to Coastal Impacts, and that'll provide you kind of an overview. BECI is really what we see as a legacy to the International Year of the Salmon more broadly, but in particular to this work that we've been working towards in this expedition, the 2022 expedition and the 2 Gulf of Alaska ones that preceded us. I've got a question for the panel coming out of that presentation, and then we'll go into several overview presentations. As Aidan noted, there are other, BECI is potentially nested in some larger initiatives. So we'll hear from Dr. Sonia Batten and Dr. Stephen Bograd through 2 presentations. And then we'll go into a question and answer period, just more broadly around everything as it comes together and looks to move forward. So maybe the next slide. Just to I won't do an in-depth introduction. I'll ask each of our panelists when they speak for next to take an opportunity to give you a little bit more. But Dr. Sonia Batten is the Executive Secretary for the North Pacific Marine Science Organization, PICES. Dr. Robert Day is an International Fisheries Advisor. And Dr. Stephen Bograd, oceanographer with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And Dr. Jock White, Executive Director for Long Live the Kings in Seattle. And Dr. Brian Riddle, a Science Advisor for the Pacific Salmon Foundation. Pleased to have them with us today. So I just wanted to give you a short presentation here outlining some of the thinking around where we're going in the future around this research in the North Pacific Ocean. And it is really kind of beyond 2022, this expedition. I'll just have a couple of slides on the expedition, but it's underway. Our first ship, the Belle M. Shimada, left Newport on Saturday with Dr. Lori Whitecamp on it. So we're pretty excited it's happening. And so we're going to learn a lot. We've established begun this large collaboration that got an infusion of energy through our 2019 and 2020 Gulf of Alaska expeditions that Brian Riddle on the panel and Dick Beamish and others, and we're all part of getting that going. This is even bigger, and but where do we go from that 2022 expedition? So I'll be speaking to that. So maybe the next slide, Aidan. So I think it's time for a change. I think everybody, I don't think there's much doubt right now as we take a look around us about the impact of marine heat waves and the influence that the changes that we've seen in salmon in terms of widespread declines in salmon production, although of course there are some exceptions, but these are dramatic, and I don't think there are many people, naysayers that are out there that are doubting the impact of this uncertainty that we're and the extremes that we're experiencing right now. And I think at the same time, in addition to the fact that it's hitting us so strongly, but it's also a time for optimism, in that a lot of the knowledge systems and the technologies that are out there make a lot more possible than even 5 years ago, in terms of bringing tools to help us understand this in the way of autonomous and remote sensing and autonomous vehicles, the modeling, both the climate and the ocean models, the potential to couple it. So I think this is an optimistic time, and I think we've got opportunity to take advantage. It is a time for change, and we've got a lot that we can do to implement that change or adapt to it. Next slide. So I just wanted to acknowledge this expedition, the 2022 expedition, Pan-Pacific, and the Bell Shimada, like I say, just left. And we've already got a lot of press from a technical briefing that Lori Whitecamp, myself, and Ed Farley did on Friday. Great article in the Seattle Times that is generating interest, and we're expecting some television coverage tomorrow as the ship is in Port Angeles and just taking on more scientific crew and getting ready to head out. So we're excited. Next slide. So what kind of things are going to change that, I think there's lots of, I'm sure this audience is interested in what will be said about, what kind of new things would we do out there. But in order to do all these things that we'll talk a little bit more about, you really have to have the governance or the ability for different organizations to work together. And you're going to hear from Sonia Batten about Pisces, and I represent, and Aidan and I work as part of the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission, established by treaty 26 or 27 years ago to aid in the conservation of salmon on the high seas, and at that time, as they were threatened by driftnet, high seas drift nets. And so that threat continues through the day. So we have a large collaboration around science and enforcement, but there's so much, the challenges in the ocean science, the collaboration. And while there have been historical collaborations, that's about moving beyond some fairly rudimentary connections we have between these organizations. And I've highlighted that these same problems we're dealing with in the Pacific are driven by the same climate drivers in the Atlantic, and there are science organizations related to salmon in the ocean, like ICES and now North Atlantic Salmon Conservation Organization, that we need to build better ties, and we've been doing that. And this direction we're going to talk about with BECI and others will build on these rudimentary collect connections and really build them out. So next slide. And it's going to be enhanced partnerships. So the panel that you see today, we've got Brian and Jock and multiple countries represented. And this is where something like this, the work that we need to do in that open ocean can't be done by one country. And it can't even be done by just the agencies that are linked together through, say, something like North Pacific and Anadromous Fish Commission. It's going to take academia, the private sector, NGOs, and this is just the list of some of the main contributors to the $10 million project that is the expedition, and it's going to take a whole lot more to make this happen into the future. So go to the next slide. This is the expedition as it stands right now, with four vessels. And note we have a gill netter that Brian and Dick Beamish did fundraising for, that's going to be looking at long line, and the remainder, the three other vessels, big fisheries research trawlers, will be collecting full-on ecosystem oceanographic work, oceanography up through the fish, and so as well as some other technology, gliders being added into the mix. Next slide. And you know, a lot of our science in North Pacific and in relation to fisheries management tend to be single species surveys for one particular species, whether it's hake or pollock or others, and then some oceanography added in. But this is going an order of magnitude, I think, in terms of the depth of the ocean sampling to begin to understand the context of salmon in the North Pacific in relation to its ecosystem. And so these are just some of the areas, whether it's, you know, the physical oceanography, but also looking at macro and microplastics, looking at the implementing hydroacoustics, and so there's a whole range of tools and full-on ecosystem study that we're engaged in here. So the next one. So how do we take this into the future? And we've over a year ago now, I guess, or a year ago this month, we submitted a proposal that, when I mentioned the Basin Events to Coastal Impacts, to the UN Decade for Sustainable Development that runs through 2030. And so this is a United Nations initiative, and we think that will bring resources and people together across the globe. And we think the opportunity is right for a project like BECI to engage in a much more holistic and integrated approach to understanding what is taking place in the ocean. And so this decade initiative, and we have been endorsed by it as of September. And so being endorsed doesn't come with money, but it comes with that endorsement opens doors to funders who are interested in supporting the projects like BECI. So next slide. So I'll just speak now to what BECI is. It's an ocean intelligence system for a changing world, and I think intelligence to me is one of the key aspects of this. We really need monitoring and flow of information from data to decisions to be much more rapid than it is. And a lot of the work we do in fisheries using statistical models, that stuff has to happen. But we're going to, it's okay, you can go on to the next one. But we're going to need the mechanistic understanding of what's going on in these systems to even derive the appropriate statistical models. So the big objective around this is to develop and test an international ocean intelligence system of monitoring, research, and analytical approaches that provides timely knowledge and advice to decision makers about the impact of current and future climate on ocean conditions in high seas and coastal social ecological systems. We'll use salmon out of the gate as an exemplar, but we're approaching it in a modular way so that these, the same approach and most of the information can be used to drive the same kind of advice to other stocks, whether they're in the high seas like squid and sorry, or coastal domestic or slope and shelf species that are of interest to particular countries or bilateral arrangements. Lead organizations in this will be the North Pacific Science Organization, PICES, and NPAFC. We have a list of partners there that draw on our partners from the International Year of the Salmon, but that's just I think just a beginning list on where we go. Like we say, it'll go through 2030, and the cost is estimated to be somewhere between 50 and around $100 million through 2030. And what's different, what's going to change? It's going to be governance, how we work together, and I've spoken to that a little bit already. The use of big data systems and new networking systems, and the use of technology that I've spoken to already. So next slide. So the major components around BECI, and you can go on, hit it again, bringing together sort of our understanding of climate, oceans, and how it relates to salmon in this case. But as I say, it could be modular in other species. Hit the next one. And as we're trying to link our knowledge of climate and oceans, there's a requirement for new surveillance techniques in terms of the monitoring. There's new models, whole new understanding in the next several years, at least in the Northeast Pacific. New regional ocean models are coming on, climate models and ocean models are coming online with higher spatial coverage and resolution. We need to connect our knowledge of the oceans through the processes of what's taking place in the ocean to fish production, as well as connecting the climate change to freshwater impacts on salmon. Through the use of assessment frameworks, monitoring, data mobilization, communication, education, will link what we come to understand about how the ocean and climate are interacting with salmon. We can start to inform communities and management systems about the impact of these changes on salmon on scales of days to decades would be the idea. So next slide. So what are some of the elements around the organization of BECI? As I pointed out, with our with the various governance systems that we've got, we will be bringing together these intergovernmental organizations. It'll be administered through PICES as a special project. In the interim, the Tula Foundation in Canada will very soon be announced as a coordinating body for the UN decade in the Northeast Pacific, and we expect them to house BECI until such time as it gets approved. Funding, we believe, will come across partnership arrangements with input from NGOs, government, academia, and big foundations. We'll look through the whole program to ensure that it reflects gender, generational, and geographic diversity, as well as incorporating and the understanding of multiple knowledge systems, including Indigenous and Western science. Next slide. Some of the activities, developing an ocean monitoring, a new approach, or a modified approach to integrated approach to ocean monitoring program that will build on the expeditions that have taken place. We'll mobilize ocean data using the GOOSE Global Ocean Observatory systems, but starting to bring in the graph technologies and other new technology that's out there for doing that, much as the internet, as the social media revolutionized the way business gets done. Same needs to be done for ocean data. Developing the new modeling I mentioned, and linking people like yourselves on this call, on this seminar, into a graph database to allow us to connect people, events, ideas, and data. The next slide. So I'm going to go into this in detail, but I think this work on the open ocean, one of the biggest questions we always get is, so what? We can't do anything about the open ocean. Why? We just need to look after freshwater for salmon. But I think this is such a key area. We know this is a key area and bottleneck that if you don't have the understanding of what's going on in the open ocean, it's very difficult to make good decisions with legacy effects of freshwater actions, whether it's hatchery related or restoration any kind of recovery needs to consider what's going on in the ocean. So we will provide the link through the models and the decision support tools will help incorporate our understanding of ocean that we need to manage efforts in all other aspects of fisheries and life history. Climate vulnerability assessments will be informed by how we understand salmon are interacting with the ocean. We've got illegal, unreported and unregulated fisheries still taking place in a large chunk of the open ocean, and we need to use our technology to get out there. We can't send ships out, afford to send ships every year, but we need to be out there. And so we can have a big influence on how we go about our enforcement and understand the impact of these activities on our salmon. And like I said, in a modular approach to BECI, we can build linkages between the open ocean, the basin, and the shelf communities, whether it's salmon or other species. And as well, there's a huge amount of development, ocean mining and other activities that need to consider their interaction in the future with salmon. And so this is where we can have an impact with these studies and this work. Next slide. So where are we going from here? We're working to establish an interim office. As I said, Tula Foundation will administer BECI. Our planning phase will take place over through June, roughly at a cost of 350K Canadian, and we've got some of that funding. Brian Riddle has been able to, through the Canadian industry, get some funding to begin work on this planning. Once we've got this an implementation plan, more detail in hand, we'll be submitting that proposal to Pisces, and hopefully then we'll see the transfer in year 2 to Pisces, and the project will be implemented. So there's still very much in a detailed planning phase. So we look to engage people. Those of you that are interested, we look to be engaging you and others in the development of this. So on to the next one. Yeah, so with that, I just want to sort of engage our panel. All of the panel have been are involved in planning and helping to make both the expedition and the BECI project a reality. So the question I wanted to put out to our panelists was what's the biggest change you see in high sea salmon research and management that could come from BECI? And I'm going to ask Jock to kick us off on that one. You're still muted there, Jock.
Not like I haven't done any of these Zoom meetings before. Thanks so much for kicking me the first question here. So I'm Jacques White. I'm the executive director of Long Live the Kings. We're a nonprofit organization here in Seattle. Been around for about 30 years, and we're focused on wild salmon and steelhead recovery and sustainable fishing. So from our perspective, we've been working on coastal populations here in Washington State for quite a while. We partnered with Brian Riddle's organization, the Pacific Salmon Foundation, and a whole bunch of other folks to try to understand what's going on with marine survival of salmon and steelhead in the Salish Sea, or the waters here, the shared marine waters between Washington and British Columbia. And what we found is that there are very significant impacts on salmon survival just in the coastal waters. But what we really don't know much about is what's happening to our salmon out in the open ocean. I think that's often referred to as a black box. We put the fish out from either natural river production or from hatcheries, and the fish go out in the ocean, and you roll out your gold teeth, and sometimes they come back and sometimes they don't. I think the thing that's the most exciting for me and for the commissioners I work with there are commissioners from the US for the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission, is the opportunity to understand what is controlling salmon growth and production in the ocean, at least at key times, and what other organisms they're interacting with, and what are the potential roles and relationships. The data that was returned from the 2019 and the 2020 IYS expeditions in the Gulf of Alaska was nothing short of remarkable from my perspective. Getting eDNA data about which salmon populations are there, what does their prey field look like, what predators are in the environment, and being able to sample and get information on fish and other species that are hard to sample with nets was really helpful and can help us to understand the ecology of the fish in the ocean. Secondly, having genetic stock identification for the actual fish that are out there allows us to track them back to the rivers where we actually do manage the populations, or to the hatcheries if that's where they come from. So this kind of data provides us with a really, really helpful tool for managing salmon stocks in the places where we actually have some control over them, and understanding what factors they're facing in the open ocean. I think the reason BECI is appealing is because it allows us to perhaps replace some of the on-the-water research that's very, very expensive with ship time and scientist time with more remote sensing devices. So I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that, but that is what has us excited about it and thinking about how we can use this tool going forward for managing salmon for the next 10 or 50 years.
Yeah, thanks, Jacques. I'm going to go to Stephen. So we've got an oceanographer's perspective on, what would a program like BECI sort of where would you see the big advancements in research and management coming from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing, and Jacques alluded to this, is the scale. So to get improved monitoring and understanding of mechanistic drivers of salmon populations on scales from the coastal ocean onto the basin scale, and how processes across those scales are interacting. I think that's absolutely key, and still sort of a missing link. And I think trying to understand those mechanisms better will help us improve our modeling efforts so that we can get into maybe developing forecasts or climate projections of where we might be going 10 to 20, 50 years out. So I think that's the big thing, I think.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So Robert, you bring an international perspective to this, countries, sort of diplomacy between countries. What's your take on what a big impact of this on management might be?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That was a great presentation. So I spent 20 years plus doing international fisheries for the government of Canada as a negotiator, head of delegation, and helped develop some of the frameworks in the North Pacific, including the most recent RFMO there, the North Pacific Fisheries Commission that was on one of your earlier slides. And the challenges, but the importance of developing mechanisms to collaborate on the science to feed into decision-making processes is key. Fisheries managers, of which I was one until I retired this past year, are asking for more and more information, clarity, and trying to deal with uncertainty, such as climate change and what the predictions will be coming from that. And that's important for salmon that we're talking about here, but equally for other species. And so with the North Pacific Fisheries Commission, when it was developed, there was recognition that we can't keep building more management bodies and then creating a new science process to support them. And so I see huge opportunities for the international collaboration here to develop a better understanding of the marine ecosystem, apply it to management of our salmon species of great interest to us in this process, but also, as you've noted, through the modular approach of potentially applying it to other species. And I think that will generate interest from governments who are perpetually searching for money and resources and how to stretch financial resources and human resources, and also the partnerships that you highlighted. I think that's a key element moving forward. It's not just through governments, but with academic partners, through NGOs and others, to develop that shared understanding, including industry, whether that's with Pattison in the current endeavor or other industry partners going forward, I think is a key element to bring this all together. And I tend to see it as a model based on, in part, the management strategy evaluation process using fisheries management, but that synergy between science, management, what is the need, and having science fill it, and then having the civil society partners in the room. So I see that as where BECI can hopefully lead us, building off of the really great work that's undertaken through the IYS and building those synergies already.
Great, thanks. So I'll go back to sort of Brian. You cover multiple scales, from sort of the local like Jock and your work in sort of regional, to also, you know, having a history of working on the high seas. So what's your take on sort of the biggest potential for change coming out of BECI?
Well, I think a lot of the ones that I really see is, a number of them have already been mentioned. It's the scale that Stephen brought up. It's that the ocean is not a homogeneous environment out there. It's far more dynamic, just based on our few cruises we had. We went for a few days where we'd catch no salmon, then we'd get 300 salmon. And it is highly variable, and I don't think we understand the dynamics. It's all about time and space, and I think that's what we need to understand to link to the climate models. I think that people have made some of these observations now, and it's how we build a collaboration or a network of people with these common interests and put all our brains together here. And I think it's going to be a really stimulating time. I think our capability and technology is about to take a huge step. We were going to do small tags that we could even put on salmon. We have the drones, we have the gliders, we have, you know, stationary buoys, we have satellites. I mean, we probably have more data than we can manage. And but then we have to challenge ourselves on how to put it all together. So I think we need all our efforts combined, and that's what BECI really provides.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Sonia, I'm going to ask you to give your presentation and sort of incorporate into it your answer on sort of what you think is going to change. And so, Aiden, maybe if you can put up Sonia's presentation, we'll launch into that. Yeah, you can take it away there, Sonia.
Thanks very much, Mark. So yeah, as you mentioned earlier, I'm the Executive Secretary of the North Pacific Marine Science Organization. And for those people who don't know much about PICES, our acronym PICES actually stands for Pacific ICES. Mark mentioned ICES earlier, which is our counterpart in the North Atlantic, the International Council for the Exploration of the Seas. And they have an existence that goes back now more than 100 years. So we're the Pacific equivalent of ICES, set up almost 30 years ago now to coordinate and promote marine science research in the North Pacific. And you can see on the bottom there our focus area, which is very similar to the cruise outline plan that Mark showed earlier. We're an intergovernmental science organization. We have 6 member countries, those that are around the rim of the North Pacific. They're listed there on the bottom left. And yes, our objective is to promote and coordinate marine science research in this region. Next slide. And we do this by facilitating collaboration, hosting and sponsoring interdisciplinary events such as various conferences and symposia, capacity development, summer schools for graduate students, for example, training courses. And in fact, we've hosted workshops and topic sessions for the IYS program over several of our last annual meetings. PICES doesn't have a formal advisory role. It relies instead on bringing together academic and government scientists and providing platforms for them to work together and cooperate. And although we cover a very large area of the North Pacific, we're a relatively small organization, so we rely very much on partnerships. And those partners include the fisheries management organizations we've already mentioned here, like NPAFC and NPFC, national government agencies, Fisheries Research Agency in Japan, DFO and NOAA, and then other academic or foundation organizations, North Pacific Research Board is a partner, Hakai Institute and so on. So we have what we call a very big tent to make sure that we can be as effective as possible in bringing a diversity of voices together. And so as well as coordinating, oh no, back a bit, yep, thanks. As well as coordinating conferences and symposia, we also help to sponsor publications, and we have our own scientific report series, newsletter. So we try and make sure that the products of the collaborative science are distributed and widely available. Okay, next slide. So don't want to dwell too much on the kind of intimidating structure that this slide shows, but just to make the point that we build in collaboration and diversity in that all of the expert groups that we have contain members from all 6 of our member countries. We have, as well as the sort of governing council and an executive committee at the top there, we also have standing committees, which are sort of discipline-based, human dimensions, fisheries, science, biological oceanography, and so on. Those are permanent committees. And then underneath them, we have expert groups that have a variety of lifespans from 1 year through to longer lived advisory panels, for example. Typical, or the most common expert group is a working group, has a 3-year term, and we have somewhere between 12 and 16 of those at the moment. So each of the working groups has a blend of scientists from academic backgrounds, government backgrounds, from all of our member nations, and they may be tackling a particular cross-disciplinary theme, or maybe very focused. So we have a very new working group just starting out now, looking at the effects of climate extremes on coastal communities. We have one on looking at ways of monitoring marine microplastics, for example. So in this way, I think that we can provide opportunities for some of the science that Becky's talking about doing to come together and explore with scientists who might have a different background or a different expertise. Perhaps there are local case studies that have tackled a particular issue that's relevant to what Becky's doing, but to facilitate science that's taking place in the North Pacific Ocean as much as possible. So next slide. So Mark talked a little bit already about the UN Decade of Ocean Science and Sustainable Development. So together with our partner ICES, about a year ago now, we put in a program proposal for Pisces ICES UN Decade program. And it's called Smartnet, Sustainability of Marine Ecosystems Through Global Knowledge Networks. So essentially to reach out and provide infrastructure for groups to address some of the UN Decade goals and challenges, which I think are on the next slide, please. Yeah. So on the left here, you've got the thematic and cross-cutting topics that ICES and PICES are trying to consider in our science. Things like climate variability and change, fisheries ecosystem-based management, all the way through to international capacity development and enhancement. And then on the right-hand side here, I've got some of the examples of the things that we're currently doing or are coming up. So we have these joint expert groups looking at small pelagic fish, impacts of warming on growth rates and fisheries yields, integrated ecosystem assessments of some of the northern and Arctic regions. And then we have these upcoming joint symposia that will also be opportunities for some of the either UN Decade or in this case specifically BECI activities to be developed. We have an early career scientist conference later this year, small pelagic fish conference also later this year, and in 2023, ICES PICES annual science conference. And some of these are also a series of symposia. There's effects of climate change on the world's ocean, which will be a highlight in a couple of years' time too. So next slide. So at the moment, our Smartnet is in its sort of implementation stage, developing its implementation plan. We have 4 co-chairs. You'll see that the next speaker, Stephen Bograd, is one of the co-chairs. He knows far more about the details than I do. So we have 2 from PICES, 2 from ICES who'll work together to develop this implementation plan. And so we're drafting a strategy that will prioritize some of the UN Decade's cross-cutting themes, which are early career ocean professionals, having them engaged in the process at all levels. Indigenous communities, we need to do a much better job of bringing Indigenous communities up to the table and discussing priorities with them. And we want to make sure that we recognize the importance of promoting diversity and gender equity in all of these activities. The Smartnet program is giving us the ability to look outside of our current partner relationships and to expand and bring in other organizations that we have perhaps not worked with before, so that we can be as wide-reaching as possible. One of the early targets is going to be to develop recommendations for new and existing expert groups. And we very much hope that the BECI would be one of those programs that we'll be able to to tailor some of the expert groups to particular challenges that BECI wants to undertake. So I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take questions later in the panel discussion and pass it over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sonia. Yeah, so that's great. So we start to see how BECI fits in and can amplify or mutually benefit between what's happening with ICES, what's happening within Pisces in relation to BECI and our initiative. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephen so you can get a sense about another large project under the UN decade that I think we've envisioning BECI nests within potentially. They're certainly connected. So Stephen, you want to bring us up to speed on the Supreme program?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give a quick introduction to Supreme, and thanks, Mark. So Supreme is, as Mark mentioned, another Ocean Decade program, stands for Sustainability, Predictability, and Resilience of Marine Ecosystems, Supreme, sponsored by NOAA. And I list the points of contact there, including Hannah LaChance, who is our early career ocean professional representative for the program. And next slide. So this proposal was submitted, as was BECI and Smartnet, last year by NOAA. We did get endorsed by the Ocean Decade in September, so we're officially a program now. And Supreme is really aiming to leverage and build upon NOAA's Climate Fisheries Initiative. And so what that is a pretty large-scale cross-line office program within NOAA that aims to build an operational ocean modeling and decision support system and really expand and facilitate climate-informed decision-making within national NOAA fisheries. So the aim of Supreme really is to try to leverage that program and advance global capacity sharing around marine ecosystem predictability and management. So like the other programs, we're kind of in the early stages. We're just beginning to develop an engagement plan and an international steering committee. And I think at this early stage, probably the most important thing is for us to be, and we're already starting this, to engage with other endorsed decade programs, Smartnet and BECI being the most obvious ones. And also, I think networking with the Decade Collaborative Center at the Tula Foundation in British Columbia, which is soon to be, I think, officially endorsed as a Decade Collaborative Center for the North Pacific. So next slide. So high-level objectives really is to support the development of a global infrastructure to improve marine ecosystem predictability. And that's across scales, including hindcasts, nowcasts, forecasts, and climate projections, and also across spatial scales from the coastal to the basin scale. All the scales that are really required to effectively manage and sustain resilient marine ecosystems. And that's certainly the case with salmon populations as well, obviously. We really want to improve climate-ready ecosystem-based management and dynamic ocean management frameworks. And also, as I mentioned, really the main, I think, advance that Supreme will provide is to contribute global capacity sharing and development around these themes. So we want to engage and inform a broad user base from research to marine resource management, including stakeholders within local communities, and really expand our existing knowledge networks and create new resourcing opportunities. So as I mentioned, we're in the early stages, but we do certainly welcome interested participants to join as we begin to co-design and implement this program. Our initial outreach has been primarily within the context of ICES and PICES activities up to now. Next slide. And so this system, following along with what the CFI is planning, is really got these three interconnecting components. So one is the science and development. So really trying to get a better understanding of how climate impacts marine ecosystems. And then onto an operations and infrastructure component where we really are trying to build that modeling system and decision support system to help manage marine ecosystems under a changing climate. And then finally, the extension and engagement, where we're actually taking that climate information, getting it in the hands of the right people, and engaging those end users and stakeholders. And it's really a, you know, these arrows go both ways, because at the early stages, we need to get that input from end users and stakeholders and potential partners so that we are developing the right system. Next. So expected outcomes, you know, of course, we want to ultimately have robust climate, ocean-related forecasts, predictions, and projections to inform risk assessments and resource management. More, I think, aspirationally down the road, maybe towards the end of the decade, is to facilitate the development of adaptation strategies that can reduce risks and increase resilience of marine coastal resources and the people that depend on them. So our activities really are enhance the utility of existing climate information, develop these common modeling frameworks, establish communities of practice and regional teams, including in partnership with these other Ocean Decade programs, fuel innovation and co-development of applications, and provide timely and accessible information. And of course, you know, as is important for anything that we do, and certainly within the Ocean Decade, promote international capacity development, as well as gender, generational, and geographic diversity. So next slide. So priority activities just for the first year or two, as I mentioned, we're just beginning to think about our governance structure, develop an international steering committee and implementation plan, and begin to reach out to partners and develop these regional teams that will help us co-develop the program. We are hoping resources, if resources are available, to hold workshops in the near future, one on strategic planning and capacity sharing around these modeling frameworks, and then one that's more on stakeholder engagement. And of course, there's lots of opportunities within the Ocean Decade to participate in some of their activities, including their communities of practice and Ocean Decade laboratories. Next. So opportunities to participate and engage, you know, again, we're at the early stages, but we really are looking for partners who are interested and will help us, you know, really just think about how do we co-design and implement this program. Up to now, we've mostly had a few bilateral and multilateral meetings that NOAA has had with other like-minded government agencies, for example, DFO in Canada. We've been participating, as I mentioned, in these Ocean Decade communities of practice. We are planning to have workshops and various side events at upcoming symposia, including the next Pisces annual meeting in Korea in September, and then certainly the joint ICES-PICES annual meeting in 2023 as well. And as I mentioned, you know, keep an eye out for hopefully these Supreme hosted stakeholder fora and the development of an international steering committee. And I think that's my last slide.
Great, thanks very much, Stephen. So I think we've painted, I hope we've painted what I think is a pretty compelling vision for where sort of projects and mechanisms of the UN Decade could really advance our work in management from data through decisions. I'm going to ask if any of the audience have questions about what you've heard. If you can put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. And while we're waiting to see what comes up, I'd like the panel to kind of turn its mind to, you know, as you heard from Stephen, and from me and Sonia, we're in the implementation and in fact sort of detailed planning stage, and a lot of this is going to depend on a very large community of researchers and management interests to be part of this. So just to ask you to reflect on where you think the barriers are and the potential solutions going forward. And I'm going to ask, I'll go back to Jock again to say, what do you think in terms of an NGO community? How do you see it contributing and engaging to something like this large international efforts that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is going to be for us to connect across the basin with other non-governmental organizations and interests. to make sure that we understand what the needs are, where the shared interests are for organizations like ours, and then how best to proceed. I think, you know, there are cultural differences between how our organizations interact with our various governments and our various science authorities in the different countries. And so this is new territory for us. And I'm more familiar with the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission and the level of coordination or lack of coordination with non-governmental organizations around that. I'm not quite as familiar with Pisces or how that operates in that environment. We've worked extremely well with our Canadian partners, Brian and others at the Pacific Salmon Foundation and other organizations here in the States. So I think that will be a challenge, and understanding the culture and particularly how to drive the outcomes of these research programs into action and into responsible management.
Great, thanks, Jock. Tim Vanderstap asks, given the scale of BECI, what are some of the challenges that a project like BECI faces, and how are those addressed? And I think it's similar to the question I posed to you. But maybe I'll go to Robert. And on the international scale, what do you see the sort of challenges and solutions there in terms of allowing partners to work internationally?
I think certainly I can say that when I was practicing as a manager, the challenge that we had was how to bring the information together to support decision making. And your summary of from data to decisions was fantastic. Like that's was it 4 words, and you've captured the challenge. To take IYS and expand it, to make it more commonplace and routine, to have that better understanding, to bring in the oceanographic work along with the biological, and have that as a more common practice, bring in the innovation through alternative platforms over the course of the next decade is key, to have that better understanding of the marine ecosystem. And then ensure that that work, though, can be applied to decision making, whether that's through the various salmon bodies or others. I think it is absolutely fundamental. The managers that I've talked to in the last year have, I guess, begun to accept that science can now paint a better picture of the marine ecosystem that can go beyond the single species management regimes that we typically have relied upon, to start to look at multi-species interactions. We know that that is important in a number of species in the west coast of Canada, but more broadly, and that we can start to understand how that functions. And so that is a key element, as well as that the science be, if you will, applied in a science to decision making. So from data to decisions is that summary is very key. Huge challenge, but I think through an organization like Pisces, to have the solid science done, a collaborative process developed, and then have that applied through various management bodies such as NPAFC, through the bilateral Pacific Salmon Treaty and Pacific Salmon Commission, or through other international processes, I think is a really important element here, and would build upon the success of IOIS. Absolutely.
Thanks, Robert. Brian, your thoughts on some of the barriers that we've got out there? You've been in this game of trying to make this international work happen. What are you thinking about barriers and solutions?
Too few people and too little time. It's become extremely evident that the key people for all 3 projects are the similar people, and we need to clone them, or we simply need to have a very open communication in the first few months to identify the topics, not so much to have people commit their time, but to freely generate ideas that we have to build on. And then we'll put the network together. But right now, I have to say the limitation I have is just simply getting people's time. And I think everybody today in the seminar will probably notice a lot of similarity between 3 very large and challenging projects. And so I think we need a willingness to really communicate initially. People don't have to commit a ton of time initially, but we really do need the network of people to talk to and steal their ideas, start to build a program, and then we can actually see how to resolve it. Obviously, in the short term, money is a hesitation as well, and that, but it's a big challenge ahead of us in a few months.
Sonia, your Pisces organization, engages hundreds of scientists around the Pacific Rim. So, and I think it's always the devil is in the details on these projects, that people can be around a concept. But how do you see, from your Pisces perspective, the barriers to making something like this this work, and what it might be the solutions?
The others have touched on a few of those, challenges already. I think that what Pisces experience has shown is that the trust building that you get by sitting down together and communicating is really key to breaking down these barriers. So, because you've got cultural diversity and different perspectives too. Pisces has for the last few years had much more activity from social scientists. So when you have a group that includes academic, government and social scientists, as well as the stakeholders who are trying to manage the resources, you come up with much better conversations. And I think that you can develop approaches to dealing with these challenges much more effectively by simply communicating and talking. So, I think that it's always, said that, communication is the biggest, is the best way forward. And I think that that's very true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Stephen, supreme is a pretty supreme big word. It's pretty, and it's very ambitious what you've got going there. So what do you see as the keys for implementing supreme?
Well, I go back to what everyone's been saying. It's all about, having the means to communicate, and really identifying the people that should be communicating at an early stage. And I mentioned, in my Supreme presentation about reaching out to stakeholders and end users, but in reality, they're meant to be partners, in helping to actually co-design these programs from the beginning, as opposed to just being, hey, we did something here, please go take it and do something useful with it. And that's, and that to me is the biggest challenge. How do we do that efficiently? What are the means of communicating? And I do think that these Ocean Decade programs and the decade itself, and certainly Pisces, are well positioned to help, facilitate some of those communications.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no. So we've all outlined, I think, a really ambitious endeavor that I believe will take place. These programs will build out and be transformative. And I'm with you, Stephen, and others, in that it really is going to revolve around the ability to communicate across cultures and scales. It is daunting, but I'm heartened. I see. I think our expedition. I think Beamish and Riddle were right in that we had to. A lot of us, were in the firmly in the planning camp, and others had, like Dick and Brian, had wanted their boots on the ground to say we got to do something. And I think both sides are right. We had to think this through, and we had to build the partnerships, but we also had to go out and do something. And I think the fact that we've generated data, but as much as that, generated the ability to work together, or recognize just how powerful the partnership is, and the collaboration, watching young scientists and work together on the same ship and generate knowledge and ideas. And so I think that sort of smaller subset of work has given us, I think, a pretty good window into that this is possible. And I think we are well positioned, I think, to influence both government, academia, NGOs, and others to bring the what we need to bring together to make this stuff happen. So I'm quite optimistic. I see there's one comment. We'll wrap here in 60 seconds, but great presentations and initiatives. How do you see standardization of data and integration? Do you see this as an integrated platform outcome for these three big projects connected to satellite research or NGO teams, small projects? As a small nonprofit, as a not-for-profit, how can we connect? There's a lot in there in that question, but data standardization, the project that we're working on now with the 2022 expedition, we have been working with international formats around the Global Ocean Observatory System, working with other agencies and partners that have the knowledge of the technology and the vision. So the data mobilization is key in this thing. Standardization, yes. Making the data move and work for us. It'll be the lifeblood of any of these programs and projects that we have. I think we do see it as an integrative platform. And so Stephen's the guy right in the middle of almost all of these projects. But yes, we see these programs working together. And I think for a nonprofit, small nonprofit, well, I think Jock, I think you would characterize yourself as a small to medium-sized nonprofit, and there's certainly room for everybody to be in the conversation, because this work is going to go from watersheds to the high seas. It's got to be relevant to communities. So I would say just be in touch with us, and I think we'll put up a last slide, but you can get in touch with us at NPAFC and the Year of the Salmon. And there was one comment there thanking us for the presentations, etc. So I'm going to wrap, but I'm going to ask Aidan to come in and just and close it out for us. But I want to, from my perspective, thank the panelists, thank everybody for joining us, and it's been a great ride, and look forward to having you follow our expedition. And that will be online, and our social media, as well as looking to have you get involved in BECI and other programs like Supreme and Smartnet as we go forward. So I'll turn it back over to you, Aidan, please.
Thanks, Mike. Just a note on the question there regarding data mobilization, I'd also direct you towards the recording of Seminar 5, where our partners at the Hakai Institute sort of outlined some of the work they've been doing with the high seas expeditions and data mobilization more broadly. But as Mark said, thanks everyone for watching, and thanks everyone that's joined us also for the previous 6 seminars. I hope that you've come away with some interest or excitement in the work we're doing, and make sure you watch this space for more updates via our social media and website. And like I said, this seminar recording will be available on the RYS website in the coming days. So thanks very much, and take care.